On behalf of Peter Shergold and the Centre for Social Impact, I welcome you to tonight's Yakety Yak episode. Yakety Yak is a series of conversations with notable Australians, and we post these on our website, on our Centre's website. Tonight's host is PricewaterhouseCoopers, our interviewer is Peter Thompson, and our interviewee is Dick Estens. Dick's passion is the Aboriginal Employment Strategy, but he's had a very interesting life around that. His life's taken him from wool to cotton to Aboriginal reconciliation to the chair of a Senate inquiry into the adequacy of telecommunications in rural, regional and remote Australia. He's won many awards and honours, the most recent being this year an Order of Australia, for all of those themes of work brought together. So welcome Dick, and I'd ask Peter and Dick to come to the front for the conversation, which continues afterwards over dinner.
Hello Dick.
Hi Peter.
Now let me explain where From Little Things Big Things Grow came from as a title, because it relates to a song that was sung by Kev Carmody, written by Kev Carmody and Paul Cave, about the Wave Hill Walk-Off by Aboriginal people, led by Walter Lingiari in the 1960s, which was the start of the land rights movement. This was also a crucial issue in relation to employment opportunities for Aboriginal people, because that walk-off about wages, amongst other things, led to a series of events which meant that Aborigines who were employed as stockmen in the Northern Territory in particular were then paid the full adult wage, and that led to major social implications for the support of families who were living on those stations. In a way, it was the crucial turning point in the movement by Aboriginal people off the vast stations of the Northern Territory into the towns. So that's where tonight's topic came from, because in a sense what we are, or that's where the title came from, because in a sense what we're talking about is From Little Things Big Things Grow in terms of employment opportunities for Aboriginal people. So it's in a sense thinking, after the lessons of 40 years ago, what opportunities and what initiatives are being taken now to employ Aboriginal people, which is what we are going to cover with Dick. But Dick, I wanted to start with you about, take us back to Gilgandra, where you were born in the late 40s, and it was regarded as a town of windmills.
It was a long time ago. I always say to people I'm a product of the first half of last century. I was actually born in 1949, so it makes me feel on the back end of the yield curve.
Yeah, first half of the last century.
Gilgandra was an interesting town. I guess what it was a town built on soldier settlers after the Second World War and the First World War.
Which your dad was.
Yeah, which my father was. Mm. Yeah, and he was a real icon in that town.
Tell us about the windmills, though. You totally avoided my question.
The windmills are a very necessary item for us people in the bush. It's where we get our water from. But it's the amazing thing about nowadays that governments want to deliver your water and you're not allowed to have windmills anymore.
Well,
it was a bit like here 20 years ago we were told to remove our tanks from our houses when you lived in a town. The government would issue you water, and now the government wants you to put wind tanks back in, and they haven't got to the stage they're allowing us to put windmills back in, but I guess that'll come in time when they run completely out of water and stuff it up.
There were 360 windmills in Gilgandra in the mid-60s because there was no town water. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Gilgandra's on the Castlereagh River. It's one of the few rivers in this country that sort of runs underneath the sand, not above it. In the last 20 years, it's hardly run at all, but the windmills still work.
Now, you're a bit of a community-minded sort of bloke, as indeed was your father.
Absolutely.
Tell us what he did.
My father had an unusual career path. He came home from the Second World War. He spent 6 years overseas in the Middle East and Borneo. And I think once you did 5.5 years, you're allowed to leave early. He had two choices. He was going to come home to be a farmer, or he was invited to go to the occupational forces into Japan. So he ended, I think, mid-45. He came home and walked straight into the 1946 drought. I think he'd saved up £100 while he was in the army for 5.5 years and blew it all straight away. But his job, I'll never forget when I was a 6 or 7 year old kid, he had a hobby, and it was studying the stars, which was an unusual hobby for my father, or for anyone at that age. And I'll never forget, I think I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, he got this old stovepipe off a chimney off our cottage, and he built himself a 10-inch telescope. And he got this lump of glass, and it took him probably a full year to grind it back to a perfect concave and then to get it treated so he could study the stars. And he'd go out of a night time with his camera, and then he made a mounting to attach his camera to this telescope, and he used to study the stars. And my father, I think, had 3 years in high school. And when he retired back in 1982 or 3, we built an observatory in Gilgandra, and that was his night job. And he'd opened it to tourists, and the observatory's still there. And as a matter of fact, I think it's just closed the other day. They couldn't find anyone to run it after he sold it about 10 years ago. That was his night job, and he used to charge families $2 to visit, and these families would be there from 8 o'clock through till 1 o'clock in the morning. He was become a real icon. That was his night job. And in the daytime, he built a museum. There was a rudimentary museum in Gilgandra, and he rebuilt all the horse-drawn areas. He pulled tractors in and gear in, and there's a huge rural museum in Gilgandra. And unfortunately, none of us lived forever, and he died about 2 years ago.
Thinking about you not living in Gilgandra, but you, of course, moved to Moree with your family. I went to the Moree show in about 1964, I think. I know you weren't there then. And I remember Moree as being a very flat plains town. There was a lot happening in Moree in the 1960s, actually, because that was the centre of the Freedom Rides. Well, it's the major stop. That's actually where things got very hot in the Freedom Rides, led by Charlie Perkins, amongst other people. So what sort of town was Moree, the town to which you moved?
It's interesting. I moved to Moree in 1977, but I was visiting Moree a lot in 1971. But it was really interesting. That whole event took place, I think it was in 66. I went to the library and I pulled out all the newspapers from 1966 backwards. It's interesting, you hardly find the word Aboriginal people mentioned in the daily local newspaper. But, as a result of the referendum and the freedom rides, Aboriginal people had already moved in onto the edge of town, generally living in the bottom of the Guida River. But after that, they were brought into town, and it blew the town apart.
So, was Moree a racist town when you went there?
No, it wasn't a racist town. It was probably built up as the redneck racist town of Australia. It was a town that certainly had huge issues. But, the people of Moree are no different than people in other towns, quite frankly. It's a good town to live in.
Not that this was occupying your mind all that much, because you were cotton farming, which you still are.
Absolutely. No, the thing is, I've always lived on a farm all my life, and when I moved to Moree, I never expected to live in town. But I live in the middle of town, but my farm is actually on the edge of town. So, I would probably never have got involved with Aboriginal people if I'd lived on a farm.
And cotton farming is such a huge industry and a very profitable industry.
Was. Global warming's killed us. Monsanto's ruined us. With the genetically modified crops, they've supplied into China and Pakistan and India, and their yields have gone from 1 bale a hectare to 7 bales a hectare. So it's had a huge impact on growers in Australia.
So back in those days, when you were establishing your role in cotton farming, you were starting to get involved in rural organisations.
Yeah, I was heavily involved in, Guida Valley cotton growers. I've always been involved in aspects of the town. Probably one of the first jobs I got involved in was moving the Moree preschool. Then I got involved in the Moree Club. I think I was the chairman of that for a few years, till the drought hit. The Moree Club was generally the men's club, and the women had the women's club. They wouldn't work in with us. I tried to amalgamate the women's club with the men's club, but we had this tyrant of a woman that wouldn't amalgamate. We had the better building. So, and I remember it was the drought through, it went from about 93 to 2006, and us men had to close our club down. And the women's club survived because, I thought it was grim tactics the women used on me.
Well, talking about the 1990s, as you're absorbed by various community organisations and cotton farming and bringing up a family and the like, the Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody reports in 1991. And one of its recommendations is that an Aboriginal employment strategy be started. And in a way, various moves were made in New South Wales to actually get sort of experimental things happening. And Moree was one of those places.
What they actually called for was Aboriginal promotion committees. I think they set up 7. I don't know, I'm not sure now whether it was around Australia and New South Wales. And I took a phone call one night from the CES about would I become a member of this promotion committee. That would have been in about 1991, I think. And I asked another person, this girl said to me, and I think she was the head of the CES, could I bring somebody else to the table? And I brought my good friend Alice Scott, who was a wife of a cotton farmer. And I guess we started from there. I remember I think we met about 4 or 5 times. The government gave us $2,000 for Aboriginal promotion. But we never got too far. There's so much anger. The meetings had disrupted in turmoil. That was Moree.
So explain the step between those beginnings and the setting up of the employment strategy in 97?
I haven't got swine flu, but I've got a wog. I think it was at the end of that process and we could tell it wasn't working, and a young girl tapped me on the shoulder, and I thought she was a young Aboriginal girl, but 10 years later I realised she wasn't. She tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Estens, I think what you need to do is start an Aboriginal employment strategy in the cotton industry." And I guess that was the start of it. That would have been about 93. And at 92 that would have been. And it took till 96, November 96, so it took nearly 5 years to get a strategy underway with Guada Valley cotton growers and with Aboriginal people. The reason it took 5 years, every 6 months we'd get another bureaucrat to deal with and they'd want to reinvent the ship. We'd get a new CES manager and they'd want to reinvent the ship. Nobody had ever done an employment strategy with an association. We all nearly ran out of steam getting through that 5 years.
Well, what was happening in those, other than the dealing with the bureaucrats, what was happening in those 5 years in terms of the jobs created for Aboriginal people?
In Moree. Generally I remember in 97 we started doing a sort of a head count on what we could work out on Aboriginal people that were working. And I remember there was about 72 or 73 working in Aboriginal organisations, and there was probably quite a few. There was probably 20 or 30 working out there in businesses. Not a lot, but a few. And there was a few that had their own businesses running, just a couple. Moree was a town that probably accepted Aboriginal people to a degree, but the anger between black and white was high.
Did you have success in getting the cotton industry to start employing Aboriginals?
Well, we used the cotton industry. I remember when I went to the Cotton Growers Associations and said, this is what we want to do. It was a tough vote on that night. I think we got 60% of the people supporting us. They said, Dick, as long as you do it. But I knew to drive a program you'd have to be a chairman. I was the chairman of the Guada Valley Cotton Growers, and if you're not a chairman, you're not going to have enough behind you to start. It was difficult because I had no supporters. Most people said to me that the program wouldn't work. It was really good to deliver on it. I remember, I think we started in February 97, and by September 97 I had 5 Aboriginal people in jobs. And I'd just drop in there all the time and talk to my guy, and he rang me up about 8 o'clock in the morning. He says, none of them at work. And I'd noticed by September my committee had disappeared. And I said, well, geez, mate, it's mentor. You just got to fix this. Get out and find them. So I came in and gave him a hand, and we rounded up 4 of them. The 5th guy I never found. I think he's still running. And we got him back onto the job, and it was probably my best day and my worst day.
So this was really the start of things, and it became broader. The Aboriginal Employment Strategy, as it was called, was officially formed in end of 96, 97, and you became the
We
first
got
chair.
rolling in February 97.
And you're still chair.
No, I chaired it through to September 11th, 2001.
What happened that day?
The world changed, and the AES changed too. It was really interesting how that occurred, because for 3 years I drove a fairly heavy campaign in on Moree on pulling, to get Aboriginal employment working, you've got to first of all pull black and black together, and then you've got to pull black and white together. There was as much problems between the factions in the community as there was between black and white. So Warren Barnes, our original manager, he worked on pulling the factions together. We'd have team meetings on how we're going to do that. We formed a group that revolved around issues that was reasonably successful. I remember it was at February 98, which was the first year after running the strategy. We'd probably placed about 70 people through different aspects of work experience and a bit of this and a bit of that, but we were holding 12 or 13 people in jobs. So I thought I was starting to get a handle on the whole issue, so I went down to the local newspaper and I said, look, we've got a pretty good program running here. We've got a few Aboriginal people in jobs. We're getting a success. And I went off for my work, and I got this reporter came down, and I didn't realise he went and took a photo of every one of them. And we drew a headline in the paper that covered first page, second page, third page on the successful Aboriginal employment strategy. And then I got more phone calls, so I sort of scratched my head a bit and I said, Jesus, this media is going to work. I've got to use this a bit more. And I was getting a little bit confident, and I organised another event. I said, I'll have to do this about every 6 months. I've got to do something that'll impact on black and white. So I organised a launch for the strategy. I think it was in July that year, which was 6 months later, and dragged more headlines. I had a Sydney Morning Herald reporter up there who used the resources of the cotton industry. I think we spent 10 grand on a party at the Moree Art Gallery. We worked really hard to get about 60 Aboriginal people to attend, and it was tough. They all gathered at one end, the whiteys gathered at the other end, but we had a pretty good party, and off the back of that we got 3 or 4 days of press. It was positive. And that's the sort of tactic, we adopted. Every 6 months I'd do something that was hugely noticeable to the town, that would pull black and white together, and in the meantime we'd work hard to pull the factions in the community together.
So the AES, what was it actually doing? It's been described as like a broker. You're working with...
It's a very simple operation. It's just a relationship company.
Go on.
That's what it is, building relationships. It's not a job network provider. It just operates like a recruitment company. It's about visiting businesses, building relationships, working out what businesses do. The core client of the AES is not unemployed Aboriginal people. The core client of the AES is businesses. 100% of the staff of the Aboriginal Employment Strategy are Aboriginal people. Visiting businesses, getting to know what businesses do, building relationships, and then going back into the office and brainstorming with team players about who's best suited into the community to fit those jobs.
So who's out there who's interested in work and would fit a particular sort of specific job in a business?
Yeah, Aboriginal people are just as skillful as non-Aboriginal people. It's amazing.
Well, actually, it's not that amazing.
I agree.
Actually, one of the things that you do is you think about the Aboriginal community in thirds?
It was a tactic that I used originally because I noticed when I first got going, and I use Aboriginal community people. That is Aboriginal people that socialise and mix in an Aboriginal community. If you're going to fix a problem, in a lot of ways you've got to use a problem to fix a problem. And when we first started, my team members were helping every Aboriginal person I wanted to put into a job. And it wasn't working out too good because some of the people I wanted to put into jobs were friends of the families or friends of themselves, and they clearly weren't capable or ready for a job. So I sat down with them one day and I said, listen fellas, we've got to be careful how we do this. We've got to put the right Aboriginal people into jobs, the people that have got the right mindsets, the people that we can get skilled up a little bit. And I've always had this saying, and I use it right across the industry, like I say, you look at the politicians in this country, a third of them are very good, a third of them are mediocre, and a third of them you wouldn't want as a politician.
I don't know that you...
It's the same.
I'm thinking about it, I don't know that a third are very good.
I remember Richardson saying you had to bat down to number 11. If you can bat down to number 11, you'll be right. And I use it, right across the industry. If we look at as managers of businesses, generally, 30% of the staff we don't have to worry about. The other third we work with a little bit, and the other third we generally have to work a lot with.
And your focus in the AES was on that middle third.
So I sat down and I talked to my staff, because it was quite funny really, and I said, look fellas, generally I break this community down into 3/3. There's a third out there that are very good, that are making their way through life fine, a lot of them in Aboriginal organisations. We've got the next third that's the middle third, and then we've got the next third what I call, the back end of the community, or the bottom of the pile. And in that bottom third we have some real issues, drug problems, alcohol problems, attitudinal problems. I said clearly these people need a lot of work being done with them, and they're the very people that suck in all the bureaucrats, all the town's resources, because it's the back end and the problem end of the community that take all the money, especially when governments are working to fix problems and they can't get ahead to get preventative problems going. So what happens, it's the Aboriginal people in the middle that miss out. And I said, our clientele for this company are for all those Aboriginal people that miss out. They're all on the back end of the town, they're usually very quiet people, they're usually got fairly good principles, but you don't see them because it's the noisy mob, the rights mob, that attract all attention. We've got to find these people, and that's our core clientele, the middle third. So it was all right for a few months because I was sort of educating my staff about, how to categorise the community and sort of start thinking about who we put into a job. And then after a while, word started to get out into the community. And Aboriginal people would come up and say, you've cut our community up into 3/3. We're all Aboriginal people. And then they'd get stuck into me about who was in the middle third, who was in the bottom third. And then they'd give me a hard time, and at the end of the conversation they'd say to me, am I a middle third or a bottom third? And I guess you picked that up off a website or somewhere. I told the story before.
Good research.
But it was really interesting. It got the community thinking, because one thing that Aboriginal people didn't like, they don't like being stereotyped.
So as you were saying just before we began, that you still spend 2 or 3 days a week on this sort of work, voluntarily. What's the state of the AES now in Moree? What's happening this year?
The AES continually in Moree, it's a town of about 10 or 11,000, of which it's 25% Aboriginal. Our team in Moree have constantly placed around 120 or 130 Aboriginal people into jobs a year. If you look at a snapshot of Moree, I reckon we're somewhere around about 45% working Aboriginal families, and we're probably running, it's more than 50% what I call welfare Aboriginal families. And there lies, some of our biggest issues. What will turn an Aboriginal community is it's peer pressure. It's not peer pressure white on black, it's peer pressure black on black. That's what will move an Aboriginal community. Hence, that's why the Aboriginal Employment Strategy is 100% Aboriginal.
And outside Moree, there are similar organisations operating in other towns. Just how much is this scaled up?
There's no organisations operating in Australia like the AES. Sure, the government bureaucrats creamed everyone that looked like being successful because they didn't want anything competing with their job network providers.
So there are other branches of AES though, aren't there?
Yeah, we have 9 operational sites. My biggest battle for the last 13 years has never been with Aboriginal people, it's been with federal bureaucrats.
Just holding off on that for a moment. We'll get into the bureaucrats in a second. But when you say there are 9 other sites, where are these sites?
I think in 2003 we opened in Tamworth, then Dubbo. Now we've got offices in Blacktown in Sydney, Campbelltown in Sydney, Glebe in Sydney, Maitland, Kempsey and Alice Springs. There's 9 operational Aboriginal Employment Strategy sites.
Well, that's a very funny map of Australia. You've got all these clusters of country towns and a couple in the city of Sydney. And then you go to Alice Springs.
We have GTA sites operating.
Which means that's a training organisation.
Yeah,
right?
Brisbane, Townsville, Perth and now Melbourne. But we're in Alice.
So just explain that to us. Why does the map look like that?
I think the reason we went to Alice Springs was Malbrough. Alice Springs is a beautiful town. You go out there, I'm not sure whether anyone's been out there, but it's in a great setting. It's a great tourist town, but it's not a real pleasant town to live in. Tamara, who came in with me, she launched the Alice Springs office and ran it for a year and did an incredibly good job on it. But it's a hard town to live in because there's a huge silo mentality out there. You know, in the Northern Territory, you've got redneck white, you've got, you know, the Arunta mob, you've got the Tangenjeer mob, you've got the Central Land Council mob, you've got a Shire Council, you've got the town camps, and it's hard in silos. There's a lot of backstabbing. You're not allowed to take people out of this mob and use them in training programs run by others. It is a tough town to live in, and you walk away with plenty of knives in your back. It was Malbrough that drove us out there because he said, Dick, your company will cut across the silos.
And those other towns in New South Wales and Sydney?
They're different to Alice.
Indeed. But why did you select those towns?
We didn't, you know, some we selected, but it's a tough battle with bureaucrats because, you know, they want to make the decisions for you. So you've got to sit in there and fight tooth and nail, and in a lot of cases we get what we're given. Like, we wanted Newcastle, they gave us Maitland, and I noticed a year or two ago they said to me, Dick, we wanted to put you in Newcastle, but you took Maitland. Does that sound right, Cheryl?
Well, in terms of government support, what is it? To what extent do they financially support the operation?
With the success of the AES has never relied with the bureaucrats getting us there. It's relied on the politicians getting us there. You know, one thing that's very noticeable was the politicians visiting our offices and the politicians noticing the difference that we're making in the towns. It wasn't the Canberra bureaucrats. So it wasn't hard to sit down and talk to some of those guys to say, you know, we've got to drive this through the bureaucracy. When we expanded into Sydney in 2005, that was done with John Anderson talking to John Howard's office and Nick Mitchin and said, we're going to drive this model through and get it successful. And that's why we got there. You know, at the moment, you know, I could see I was running into trouble with the bureaucracy again, but Jenny Macklin had been through our offices. She's a huge supporter of what we do. And I think with her help, we're going to get there on this next round.
So what's your vision now? Is it that there be 100 of these around Australia or what?
You've got to be careful. You know, this is a big game of patience. We've got to keep getting it right. You know, when we open an office, it takes us a while to get the management right because we try to use Aboriginal community people. Sometimes we've got to bring in an outside person initially. You know, we ran into trouble with a few of our offices. One office that we've particularly battled with over the years. You know, we tend to use younger Aboriginal people. You know, we like managers between, we'll come down to about 26 or 27, but we don't like going above 33. Once you get above 35, I think it's probably all of us that we don't like to change in a lot of ways. We've sort of moulded and the destiny and the journeys are set up. So AES officers tend to be officers of social change. We do it differently. We don't focus on the rights agenda. We're here to get Aboriginal people into the commercial world.
And how are these separate officers governed? Do they govern themselves as separate communities?
Yeah, because I think one of the things that governments get a little bit wrong is the moment they start working with a group of Aboriginal people, they want to set up a community committee. You run it a bit like the communists run it, and you'll get the wrong people on there that just causes havoc in Aboriginal organisations, and you might battle and get through that, but you run for another year and then you get somebody else in there that destroys your committee, and it's a perpetual disaster. So when we open in a town, we always get a lot of Aboriginal elders and people come and say to us, look, we want to be on the committee, we want to be part of the organising it, and we sit down and we talk to them. Aboriginal elders are an important part of our process. We say, when you open a business in a main street, you don't put community committees around them.
So
it doesn't work.
So what do you do?
Could you imagine Woolworths being run by a community committee?
Might be better
in a town.
Might be better in some respects. Prices would be cheaper for a while.
I bet the profitability wouldn't be.
What is the governance model then?
The governance model, it's generally getting Aboriginal people to believe in themselves. We don't have huge corporate governance models on our organisations. We don't. We just use the right people.
So who selects them? Is it a democracy?
It's a democracy. At the moment, on the management side and selecting people for our AES officers, Tamara over here heads up our relationship side on who she wants working on a team. Tamara is a major general manager in the organisation. Tamara is a community Aboriginal person and a very good one.
But Dick, I haven't got the answer from you. If you're setting up a new one in Orange, New South Wales, who actually, is there a board? I'm asking a question about that.
We've got a board.
Each of them have boards?
No.
Right, there's one board.
That meets 4 times a year.
Right, one board that meets 4 times a year, and then you appoint general managers, for example, that run particular offices.
It's a funny thing, when we got hugely successful in Moree, I noticed all these state bureaucrats coming in, and they started trying to find out the secret of the success. Why are we so successful? Where's your policies and procedures manual? We didn't have one. Where's this? Where's that? We didn't have one. And then they're trying to attach themselves to our organisations to make them look good. Because it's a simple business. It's visiting businesses, building relationships.
What a recurring issue with government, and of course, if you're a bureaucrat and sitting in a government office, one thing that worries you a lot is accountability of dollars. And they essentially... The government model is to essentially have a no-risk policy. Everything needs to be accounted for.
Well, you can tell what damage.
So how does that impact on you?
I don't think we've had one issue in the AES where somebody's run off with the money. Not one issue. There's 80 people working in the company. Last year we turned over $10 million. 22% of our turnover came from corporate Australia, and we had a $1.4 million profit. And I think as I talk to you guys tonight, there's $1.7 million sitting in the bank account.
Which raises the issue of your partnerships with...
And it's still there.
Which raises the issue of your partnerships with businesses. Just explain that for a minute.
Probably the key guy... The reason we moved to Sydney was not to fix Aboriginal employment in Sydney. It was to get closer to corporate Australia. I noticed in Moree, after 3 or 4 years, we weren't getting the quality build in Aboriginal people to run the office in Moree. We were still getting the same sort of people coming through, and I suddenly realised that there was no career path development for Aboriginal people. And then I got thinking about it, and I had a young girl, Kathy Duncan, that was our manager, and we were discussing the issue, and we realised that we had to get deeper into the school systems and start career path thinking for Aboriginal people. And I remember we had a big cotton industry meeting and John McFarlane was coming through. He was the head of the ANZ Bank and his office rang me up. I have a lot of time for John McFarlane. He said, Dick, I want to come around and talk to you about Aboriginal employment because I was putting a fair bit of pressure out there and he knew that we're in this field. And I think in 2002 or 3 there was a documentary went out on called Message from Moree. That was an hour-long series that was on Big Country that focused on our work in Moree. And we sat down and we had a talk to him about, and he said to me, Dick, we need to employ Aboriginal people in the bank. How are we going to go about doing it? You know, we've got branches out in the Pacific Islands and Papua New Guinea and elsewhere, and we're using local people. And Kathy Duncan, my young Aboriginal manager at that stage, who featured in Message from Moree, said, look, we want to get school-based trainees happening in the bank, the ANZ Bank. So he said, I'll go along with that. We didn't have any paperwork, we had no process. You know, within a few months we had a kid in the bank at Moree. We got Bruce McCalter, who was the area manager at Tamworth, that came on board with the process, and we just developed the process from that point forward. You know, today, this year, the ANZ Bank will be taking on 180 Aboriginal school-based trainees right around Australia. Once we got the ANZ Bank on board, I thought, well, Jesus, this is going to be a bit expensive, so we need another bank to justify travelling to these towns. So I went and saw the area manager of the Commonwealth Bank, and we arranged a meeting with the rural manager out of Wagga. Just his name, what was his name tomorrow?
Don't worry about his name.
We picked it up. I'd like to promote him because he made a major decision for the Commonwealth Bank. He committed the Commonwealth Bank to the program behind the ANZ without even talking to his CEO. So that they
it's good to have a bit of competition between banks.
They followed along behind us. What we're building, you know, and what we've got is an incredibly successful Aboriginal company, 100% managed, in a lot of ways by community Aboriginal people. The community Aboriginal people, you know, it's something that I've really come to admire, their sense of community and how they do it as a group. And we're getting real runs on the board and we're really building huge depth into the thinking of the company as to how we're tackling the problem. And as we non-Aboriginal people sit up there and we think how we're going to fix the Aboriginal problem in this country, I can tell you how it's going to be fixed. It's going to be fixed by Aboriginal people. It's going to be fixed by Aboriginal people using the right structures that are grassroots developed, that are not imposed on them, that's the right model that gets the job done. I don't fix Aboriginal employment. I'm not out there visiting, you know, doing the work in this company. I'm just a non-Aboriginal person that sits down, that listens, that understands Aboriginal people, that help guide them through the business world, keep bureaucrats off their back, keep bureaucrats from, you know, destroying the company, which they've done quite a few times, and help these community people that are generally very quiet people, that they want great expectations for their kids, and we work out how we're going to deliver and how we're going to get their communities to deliver for their communities. With the AES company, it's not a company that manages down, it's a company that manages up. The success of our company is our leadership team, which is at least 20 Aboriginal people that are in offices scattered around Australia that ring in each month to debate the running of the offices, where our strengths are, where our faults are. Every 3 months the leadership team comes together, we debate the issues about how we're going to move the mob forward. That is the success of this company. It's not me telling Aboriginal people what to do.
Dick, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Peter.